This is Natalie Marine Street, the Oral History Program Manager for the Stanford Historical Society. And I'm happy to be here today with the winners of the 2022 Susan W. Schofield Oral History Award, Michael Kahan and Nova Meurice. Their project, Urban Studies at 50, documents the origins and evolution of the Stanford program on urban studies. It really impressed the selection committee, and we wanted to just have them share some more information about the project with us today. So can I ask each of you to introduce yourselves and just tell us a little bit about you and how you came to urban studies? And we'll start with you, Michael.
First of all, I'm very grateful to be receiving the Schofield Award. So thank you very much. Delighted to share a little about this project. So my name is Michael Kahan, and I'm the co-director of the program on urban studies here at Stanford. And so I've been working in the program on urban studies for about the last 17 years now, 18 maybe it is now. And I'm a historian by training. So I've always been interested in finding out more about the history of the program in which I work. So this was a really wonderful opportunity for me to dig into the origins of the program, the development of the program, and to really kind of discover more about what created the place that I have the great privilege to work in.
Great. And Nova, how did you get involved in this?
Yeah, so my name is Nova. I'm a fourth year comp lit student, and I've taken a number of urban studies classes, but I am not an urban studies major. I guess I was interested in the space because I was involved in some student activism around housing justice, and like quite a few students from urban studies were involved in that. So I was also curious about like the ways that student activism kind of influenced the shape of the curriculum, especially in the early days, and yeah, maybe some of the limits of like what like activism at an institution like Stanford University can look like.
Great. So tell us a little bit about the shape of the project. How did you decide sort of who to interview and what kind of questions to ask them?
We began by recruiting a committee, an advisory board of mostly affiliated faculty, and I think a couple of alumni from the program to share the idea for this project and to get some of their suggestions for whom we should interview and what kinds of questions we should ask. And we settled on interviewing the faculty, especially those who had been involved in the early days of the program, and also in focusing on some of the students who had been involved in the origins of the program, particularly those who were involved as both students and administrators. And one of the unique things we discovered about the urban studies program was the ways that students really played a role, very active role in establishing and running the program in its early years. So we were able to speak with some of the students who had that dual role as both students and administrators.
Great. Anything else to add to that, Nova, in terms of the questions that you decided to ask? Or
yeah, I guess also that we kind of used some of the people from the program to help track down some of the other people in the program, and that it was an interesting part to get to see those people like remake connections, since a lot of it had been kind of staggered over time and that like they'd lost touch as well.
In terms of, finding the people to interview, I also want to give Nova a lot of credit for the detective work that she did. Some people we knew they were still here at Stanford, but other people really, they changed their names, they moved around. There was one figure in particular who I thought was a fellow at the Hoover Institution who had passed away. And then Nova discovered, no, that was another person of the same name who was at Stanford at roughly the same time, but was not the one involved in establishing urban studies. And there was somebody else with that name who was still alive, and she found him. So, tremendous credit to Nova for her work in helping track down and contact the people that we spoke to.
And it was some really fun archival, like detective work, because the Daily has really extensive digital archive that I was able to kind of like go through all of the old papers and piece together like, okay, at what point did the organization have a different acronym? And at what point did this person join? So that I think that the person was Roy Childs, who had the Hoover Institution doppelganger, that we eventually found his email at the university he used to work at. But that was like a particularly exciting moment, was finally getting an email back from him and realizing that he was in fact the person who we thought he was, and he was also alive and willing to speak to us.
Yes, and that was a wonderful interview, and I'm sure he was delighted to get your email. So let me ask you, as you think back on the interviews that you did for the project, are there any interview moments or stories that really stood out for you?
Louise Bay Waters was one of the students who was involved early on, and she had a really personal story about her own life as a college student. She was romantically involved as a white woman. She was romantically involved with an African-American man, and that had kind of led her to African-American studies and, you know, what we might call sort of critical race studies. I mean, she was really interested in breaking down the kind of racist assumptions and in exploring the construction of race in American society. And through that, she kind of came to an interest in cities and in urban sociology. And she was one of the students who helped to establish and to run the program in its early years. And so just hearing from her about that kind of personal stake that she had in the program, and the way some of the faculty helped her to understand her own situation. That I think that was a very powerful moment. I think another one that stuck with me was talking to Fred Stout, who has been a lecturer in our program for about 50 years. So Fred is someone I know pretty well, at least as a professional colleague. But talking to him about his youth, and he was very involved in anti-war mobilization, which I did not know. Somehow, you know, along the way, he sort of drifted into the urban studies world. So it was really like a bit of a window into his development. Nova, are there moments that stay with you?
I guess I was really struck by everyone's descriptions of what campus looked like in the late 60s and early 70s, that some of the professors we talked to described coming to Stanford for the first time and noting that all of the windows were boarded up because of the, I guess, just like the volume of riots that were happening on campus. Or I guess, like, I think the anti-war movement was the largest contributor to that. But it was interesting to see how, like, the ways that some of that energy spilled out and didn't spill into the urban studies program, that as Professor Kahan was mentioning, a lot of the people who came through it kind of drifted into it in wayward ways. But that, yeah, it was interesting to see the resonances between the kind of overall political moment that was happening and the ways that that translated and sometimes failed to translate into the program.
Oral history is wonderful for documenting those kind of people's journeys and their trajectories, as well as for understanding a wider context that was influencing people. So that's really interesting. Are there any kind of patterns or anything you understand now about kind of Stanford history that that you didn't before embarking on this project?
Maybe one overall impression that I took away was, and Nova, I think, sort of hinted at this a little bit, was the kind of ferment on campus, not only in the sense of like a lot of activism, some of which became violent and angry, but also just a lot of ways of reimagining undergraduate education, and a kind of atmosphere of flexibility, experimentation, student-led initiatives, this idea of students really founding the program and creating it and setting up the courses and developing the curriculum, I feel like it would be very difficult and probably impossible for that to happen at Stanford now. The idea that there were just, there were just so many possibilities at that time for new directions, new ideas, new initiatives to bubble up from all kinds of different places. I think maybe that was a takeaway for me.
I also had a very similar takeaway that that there was something kind of exciting about that ability to let education take form in the hands of the students. Maybe a little bit more cynically was I felt like I came away with a certain understanding of the university's mission and maybe how that's changed over time, but also how that has stayed the same. About one of our interviewees did say that Stanford ultimately is here to reproduce elites, and a little bit that was part of what I took from some of the interviews here about the limits of what students can expect in terms of change from the university and curriculum.
It's interesting to hear about how urban studies in some ways had and in other ways had not influenced people's future careers. There were people, particularly among the students or the alumni that we spoke to, for some of them, it really had shaped a lot of their future trajectory. I mean, Roy Childs became a sociologist who is very involved in community-based sociology, and Louise Bay Waters really spent her whole career on issues of race and education. So for some students, it was really formative. So I think that was a takeaway as well from these interviews. And those students, the ones who were involved in founding the program, were so happy to hear that it was still going on. I think there was just a lot of satisfaction. Some of them, really hadn't been in touch with the program in a long time. So just to hear that it was still a thing, that it had gotten more institutionalized over time, that it was really a well-established part of the university, I think they found quite satisfying.
Oh, wonderful. Well, congratulations to both of you, and thank you on behalf of the Society and Stanford Libraries for the wonderful primary source archive that you've produced that I am sure scholars of all kinds of different histories will be making use of in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and thanks to the Society.